mark.
On your mark.
Get set.
Get set.
Now ready.
Ready, go.
Provocative, engaging, and usually quite a lady.
Okay, they're asking for it.
Deborah, go.
It's been just 2 weeks since President Trump has been in office, and we have seen a whirlwind of activity from the president, signing executive orders and keeping promises and handling tragedies such as the airplane and helicopter crash over the Potomac. But while all of that is going on, we are also seeing opposition, such as, and you expect this to happen, but the Democrats in Congress standing very firm in opposition to the president's choices to head up various departments and agencies. We expect that. What we may not have expected, and maybe some people did expect it, is that we are seeing a plethora of government types, elected officials, so many mayors and governors who are standing in opposition to President Trump's deportation plans for violent illegals. And even though the president has said very often and quite clearly that they first want to go after the gangbangers, the rapists, the druggies, we want to get them first. We want them out of the country. But let's be real clear about it. Anyone that is in the country who came in without benefit of a passport, without benefit of having a green card, who did not go through some process, who just came into the country, sneaking over the border, walking in, actually, they're criminals too. But I cannot get past the idea that an elected official who is charged with responsibility of protecting his or her city, his town, her town, their state. They're elected to serve Americans, the people that put them in office. I cannot get over the fact how many of them are so defiant in their position that they will not allow ICE to come into their jurisdictions and remove illegals. They say these are our people. Well, they really aren't their people. They really are not. It's interesting to me to watch so many nonprofits and non-governmental organizations who are fully committed to fighting the president on this deportation program. They say they will not have it. They're running into court. They are giving all kinds of strategies to their splinter groups, to individuals, how to avoid ICE, how to act if you encounter them. Don't say anything. Don't give them your name. Say this, say that. Call this number. We're here to fight for you. Let me take a closer look at some of these nonprofits and some of these non-governmental organizations. And it's interesting too, because so many of them have these really great sounding names, these humanitarian names, as though they really are doing good work in our country. Families for Freedom. I think, okay, families should be for freedom. I look at the Texas Civil Rights Project, the American Friends Service Committee, United We Dream. All of these organizations and hundreds more, their major issue right now is to fight deportation of illegals. And what I also find interesting is that a good number of them are funded, or they receive some funding from the Open Society Foundation, which of course is the George Soros organization that funds a lot of money to left-leaning, left-wing organizations. They have various items on their agenda, but in this aspect, deportation is something that they will fight to the finish, they say. I just think that's interesting. I also find it interesting that there are so many religious organizations that are now saying we will stand, and we will stand with our migrants, they call them. They'll stand with the illegals. though they have broken laws, so many of them have committed crimes, they say, we don't care. It is the right thing to do. It is the humane thing to do. Let me share with you just something on the website of the United Methodist Church, their General Board of Church and Society. Here's what they have to say. Right on the front page of their website, there's a statement. It's in a big red square, and it reads, "The General Board of Church and Society vehemently opposes the mass deportation plan put forth by President-elect Trump. These proposals are not only antithetical to the foundational values of our democracy, but also starkly contradict the United Methodist Church's social principles on immigration and the Wesleyan theological tradition." Right there on the front page, then follows an article which basically starts with grounding in fear, hate, and falsehoods. U.S. immigration policy calling for mass deportation of millions of people is not an act of justice, but a failure to recognize the sacred worth of every individual. That's the United Methodist Church. But that's not all. There's Catholic Charities, and I just went through some of the Catholic charity in the various dioceses, and they're committed to fighting President Trump's effort to remove illegals from the country. Several of them, the diocese in San Diego, the diocese in Milwaukee, and people, they go to these churches, and I am a Christian, and I stand with churches, but when churches are wrong, churches are wrong. And these groups, they're nonprofits, they're affiliated with major denominations, they are wrong. And it's interesting, too, because I've seen some videos, and you probably have seen some of them, too, where down at the border, they're makeshift buildings put up rather quickly, probably. But so many NGOs are down there. And what are they doing? They're handing out backpacks filled with the necessities for people to continue their trek into the country, coming across the border. They give them phones, they give them maps, and they say, we're doing the right thing. How can you be doing the right thing when you are aiding in breaking the law of this country? But they continue to do it. And then we can look at our media, and I post quite a bit about that a lot on X, because it's so disturbing to me to watch story after story. And I only really focus on the local news here in the Chicago area. Every single story that they do on immigration and deportation, it's extremely slanted to be pro-illegal immigration. They stand with the illegals. Because, and how do I know that? Because every single story that I have seen over the past 2 weeks, they talk to activists, they talk to lawyers, they talk to community organizers, and they all are saying the same thing, how this is wrong, how Trump is hateful, how families are afraid. They're afraid to go to work. They're afraid to take their children to school. They're afraid to go pick up their government assistance, whatever the case may be. I have yet, in the past 2 weeks, I have yet to see a story from a Chicagoan, from a suburbanite, that would stand up and say, this is a good thing. We need to strengthen our neighborhoods. Our schools are overrun. Our hospitals are crowded. We never hear that part of it. Prostitution on the streets. Gang activity has increased tremendously in some areas. Housing has become scant for people who maybe they can't afford to go and live in a high-end neighborhood, but affordable housing, it's hard to find it. The shelters are still overrun with illegals. No story about any of that. All of the stories, you see the images, women crying, why did they take my dad? Okay, that's a question, but the bigger question is, are we just supposed to sit back and do nothing? And again, if you look at our elected officials in many, many places across the country, they say you should stand with us. They don't want to let ICE come into the jails and pull out the illegals who have committed crimes. That would be so easy, as opposed to having them going into neighborhoods. You've got a whole lot of people, well, probably no longer a whole lot of people, because in some places like Illinois, they've let a lot of criminals out, but there still are illegals in jail. But officials say you're not getting in there. No way. It just makes me wonder, and you probably have wondered this too. And maybe you have some thoughts as to why all of this is happening. Why are elected officials standing with illegals? Why are they so willing to fight against our own country, our own government, in protecting the citizens? Why are so many nonprofits and non-governmental organizations so resistant to helping clean up communities? Why? What's going on with these religious organizations and our media? The question again is why? Why is this happening? We can ask some other questions too. Why did Joe Biden tell migrants, if you can get here within the first 100 days of my administration, you're in? Why would a president, well, I don't even remember had he been elected yet, but in any event, why would someone who wanted to be president, why would you make that kind of announcement?
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
Why did Alejandro Mayorkas, why did he lie to the American public and say that the borders are secure, when it wasn't all that difficult for people to look around and see, well, if they're secure, why are we seeing so many foreign people here? Look at New York, look at Chicago. But he still lied. Why didn't Kamala Harris fulfill her responsibility and go down to the border and really examine what the issues are? Why didn't she do her job? Well, she did go down, not to the hot spot. She went down for a photo op, and they knew that they were in the race to hold on to the White House. It didn't matter. They blatantly lied, they failed to do their job, and they knew that this was one issue that a lot of Americans agreed on. The question again is, so why did they do that? Now, you may have some thoughts as to why they did it. Maybe you're thinking, it was for votes, Deborah. Everybody knows this. They wanted to get them in the country, and the illegals would be so grateful to be in here and getting all of the resources and the food stamps and the housing and the medical care and so on and so forth. They would gladly vote for the Democrats. I imagine some of that is possible, but not every place is, no ID necessary. A few places. So I'm not certain that they wanted to convert or bring in a whole new crop of voters. Sure, that's probably a part of it, but it just makes me wonder, what's in it for these nonprofits and non-governmental organizations? Don't they rely on contributions from American citizens? Aren't they worried about offending their donors? So why? Aren't these churches concerned that their parishioners will say, you know what, we believe in being good to people and caring for the weak, but we still have laws in place that should be adhered to? Doesn't seem like they're very concerned about that. So why? Or why not? Illegal immigration has been an issue in this country for years, no question about it, but never has it been at a crisis level as it is today. And I don't want to bore you with the same question, but why? Why is it all of a sudden now we're seeing just a crazy situation where illegal immigration is truly out of control? Yes, we know what Biden did. We know about that. So the partial answer to that question as to why all of this is happening, part of the answer has to do with money, private money and federal money. Oh, yeah. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, he was a Democrat. He was liked by both sides of the aisle. Well, Senator Moynihan, he once said, and I'm quoting here, private institutions really aren't private anymore. He said that in reference to Catholic charities. But it can also be said of many other groups that are assisting with the immigration and the resettlement, as they call it, of refugees. So few of these people are refugees, it's minuscule. To be a refugee, you have to be in great fear of your life. Your country, they are persecuting you. There's a real definition to be a refugee. You're not a refugee because you want to come here and get a better job. You want better schools. You want free handouts from the government. That does not make you a refugee. But I think Senator Moynihan was onto something, because so many of these organizations, they are not relying on the private donations. We think that's the case, but actually it's really not the case. A majority of their revenue actually now comes from the government. Huh? Yeah. And also deep pocketed private groups like the Open Society Foundation, like George Soros' foundation. And the way it works is like this. They are paid by volume. That's right. The money comes in based on how many people that they are aiding and assisting in getting into the country and then providing the services for them. And by that, it could be something as simple as we'll put you in contact with this group, this agency to get you housing, to get you a link card, to get you a phone, to get you up in a hotel. They get paid on that. This is not some great altruistic endeavor. No, it's not. There's a lot of money behind all of this. This is why you can see at the border, and they probably have scattered now since Trump is in office, but for 4 years, they were down there and they had everything laid out to aid the illegals coming across the border. That money is a major motivating factor. Now, it's not just our federal government, and it's not just the deep-pocketed benefactors like George Soros, but also there are intergovernmental agencies within the United Nations that have almost endless amounts of money that flow to these groups. And I can tell you, I had to do some digging myself to find out more about this. And this is so real. So you have the United Nations with all of their various intergovernmental agencies pouring money into these NGOs for the sole purpose of aiding in illegal immigration. And now that money is flowing to help fight deportation. You have to really think about that. This is money, it's kind of like an invisible force that's fully functioning. And we can't see it, but it just kept making me wonder, so wait a minute, why would a mayor do this? Why would a governor say, I don't care what happens, take me to jail? At the same time, their citizens are saying, no, let them do their job. Let them remove these people. They don't belong here. Huh? Does any of that make sense? When the elected official, he's there because the citizens voted him in. The citizens voted him in because the citizens expected him or her to serve them, to improve their communities. But yet the elected official says, I'm going to do what I want to do. Are they really doing what they want to do? It really makes you wonder, because you have to ask yourself, don't they know that hundreds of thousands of children are missing? That human trafficking is happening? That drugs are pouring across the border? That terrorists are pouring across the border? Don't they know this? Yes, they do know it. So why are they continuing to say, we will resist? We will not allow them to take the illegals out of here. That doesn't make sense. Well, it's not just the nonprofits and the NGOs and the religious groups that are being driven by money. It's also our state and local governments. Here's the real deal here. Federal funding to state governments has soared just over the past few years. Okay, so what? No, think about this for just a moment. $800 billion went to the states in 2022. Now, something else was going on in 2022. A lot of that money was for COVID relief. But the funds are also coming in through the Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Investment. And over the past 3 decades, federal grants to state and local governments have steadily increased. In 2021, federal grants made up about 20% of the average state's total revenues. That is huge. In fiscal year 2021, Illinois, my home state, received a total of $36.5 billion from the federal government. And guess what? That was up almost 20% from the previous year. This is stunning stuff. In fiscal year 2023, the federal government dumped $1.1 trillion into the hands of the states. The Department of Justice is funding state and local police. And that's not new, but that those numbers have grown well into the billions of dollars. So, if you have state and local governments who are increasingly reliant upon the federal government for their revenue, they still depend on our tax dollars, but we are talking 20% increases year over year, 2-3 years straight. And I believe that this is why these big Democratic cities had no problem accepting the illegals. Yes, they are sanctuary cities, but those 20% increases year over year, they mostly occurred 21, 22, 23. Who was in office? There's something going on here. And let me tell you what's going on. Increasingly, what you want matters far less to these elected officials than what the federal government wants. That's the only thing that really makes sense to me. Why an elected official would say, I don't care. We're not allowing this president to bring ICE into our jails to take out the criminals, because many of them are saying this. It's happening right here in Illinois, in some counties. We're not going to comply. So your voters say, get them out. You have depended upon the voters to stay in office, to be reelected, yet you're saying, I don't care what they say. It's the money. And I don't think it's a coincidence why the federal government is increasing their monies down to the states, down to the cities, because it gives them even more influence. And that makes more sense to me now more than ever before, because President Trump is now talking about pulling federal funding. And I said, well, wait a minute. Don't you know, President Trump, that maybe you might be hurting states? He knows what's happening. They are acquiescing to the demands of the previous administration, went into the state coffers. For what? It's influence. That's all it is. It's influence. So I think this is what we're really looking at. We're looking at a lot of money that has exchanged hands, mostly in the form of grants. But then you have to wonder, so if the states are getting all of this money, why are property taxes going up in so many places? Why are sales taxes going up? They're getting more money than ever before from the federal government, yet so many of them are crying broke. We need to get more money from you. Something's not right. Something is not right. A Gallup poll from July of just last year showed that 55% of U.S. adults wanted to see immigration decreased. They wanted it to go down. They said, no, we don't want more. We want it to go down. And that was high. That was high because in previous years, recent years, that number was nowhere near that high, except in 93 and 95, it was actually 65%. But in recent years, Americans were like, okay, whatever. But during these last 4 years, people were like, wait a minute. The polls show Americans want control of illegal immigration. And elected officials, growing numbers of them, nonprofits, non-governmental organizations, religious groups, churches, they're saying, no. I thought they relied on your money, donations from you. Aren't they concerned that you would be upset about that and start to pull some of your money back? Obviously, they're not concerned. It's because the federal government is dumping more money into those various entities that I just mentioned. More private money from far-left groups like the Open Society Foundation is pouring into these groups. More money from intergovernmental agencies funded through the UN, it's pouring into these groups. It's not a coincidence. This is the answer to why they're ignoring us. They don't care why they're putting it all on the line to fight President Trump. It's not just about we don't like President Trump. Yeah, that's a part of it, but that's really not the big part of it. The big part of it is, and here's where I'm going to sound conspiratorial, and I don't care, because really the evidence is lining up. This is huge. This is global. Yes, this is global. Let me kind of lay that one out for you. Go back, if you will. Let's go back to 2016. In 2016, there was a huge story. And the story was that Great Britain was planning to leave the European Union. Now, why would they do that? Well, according to polling data at that time, the two major reasons were, number one, the British people, the citizens there, were really feeling that we don't want the European Union dictating every move we make. That was one. We should have a say-so in what directions our country will move in. That was actually number one. And right behind it was this. We don't want our borders wide open. Yeah, that was really the second reason. Now, the citizenry was divided. Younger Britons, they wanted to stay in the EU. But older people who knew England before the EU said, no, things are changing. Our voices aren't really being heard. We're listening to and having to adhere to the demands of the European Union, and we don't like it. So they put up a referendum, and the referendum showed that overwhelmingly the people wanted to get out of the EU. And then guess what happens? President Obama, he gets over there and he says he wants to talk to them. He's got some important things to say.
Barack Obama has begun a 3-day visit to the UK. Smiles and waves for the camera, but a stark message for the British people that if Britain votes out of the EU, the United States would have very little interest in doing trade with it.
Maybe some point down the line there might be a UK-US trade agreement, but it's not going to happen anytime soon because our focus is in negotiating with a big bloc, the European Union, to get a trade agreement done. And UK is going to be in the back of the queue.
That was actually a hell of a statement because it was really a threat. The British people wanted to leave the EU. One of the primary reasons was because they did not want an open border. And again, the EU has never seen a border that they liked. Let me go back just a little bit more. In the European Union, they have an agreement. It's called the Schengen Agreement. And what that is basically is that all of the members, they agreed over in Luxembourg that as a member, your people can travel anywhere in the EU, go to any country they want to. There will be no hassles. They have to have a residence in one of the member countries. But after that, they can go from country to country for work, for travel, for leisure, for whatever they want. And that's fine. The problem is immigration. So if immigrants are coming into one country, they could flow freely into any country they wanted that's a member of the EU under the Schengen Agreement. Now, there are a couple of European Union members that are not a part of Schengen, and that's Ireland and I think that's Cyprus. There may be one other, but definitely those two. So England, they said, we can't tolerate this. Now, go back again when Bill Clinton was in office and Tony Blair was the prime minister. England was having a huge problem with Muslims. A good number of them were not trying to assimilate into the country. The problem was you had these imams. They would put loudspeakers on the sidewalk so that passerbys, could hear what they were talking about inside of their mosque. And many of these mosques were just storefronts. This was going on a lot. What they were saying inside was anti-Great Britain. It was very violent. They were promoting the destruction of England, terrorism, you name it. It had really gotten out of control. Tony Blair, all this time, pretty much like, well, people come here, they can live their lives, blah, blah, blah. But they couldn't appreciate that freedom. They abused that freedom. And then Tony Blair said, enough. Anybody who is openly promoting harm, destruction, terrorism here in Great Britain, you can get out of here. We're not going to tolerate that. So that's important because they were already seeing signs of problems with the immigrants. Okay, the people, the citizens, they decided we have to go. We can't have unfettered immigration. We just can't do it. Barack thought it was his duty to hop on a plane and get over there, and he warned them, then you will go to the back of the queue when it comes to trade with the U.S. And the reason that was specious is because Great Britain has the second largest economy in Europe, only after Germany. So all of those members, 28, however many members in the EU, a bunch of them, their economies are so much smaller than England's, so much smaller. So what were you really saying, Barack Obama? Even when I just listened to it in preparing this podcast, it just riled me up because when I heard him say it then, I thought the audacity. You're the president of this country, yet you felt compelled to go and speak to the people of another country and tell them that your will, your desire to come out of the EU, you're going to pay a price for that. Just try it. You just do it. And you're not going to enjoy trade with the U.S. We may still trade with you, but you're going to go to the back of the line. It made no sense. So you'd rather lose that partner and keep these smaller countries, with the exception of Germany. They are number one, Great Britain number two, France is number three, economy-wise. It didn't make any sense. So I said that to say this. The will of the people, it's threatening. It's a threat, especially when it comes to immigration. It's a problem, but you just have to think about what's happening here. The will of the people, the voice of the people is being ignored by the elected officials. But what's really interesting is the state of affairs in Europe today. And when you look at it, because there's a poll here, I'm going to share a bit with you. It was done by Euronews and Ipsos. And the EU had their elections, I believe that was last year. But here's what the citizens of the various nations had to say about illegal immigration.
According to an exclusive Euronews and Ipsos poll, 59% of respondents said illegal migration is one of their top priorities. Illegal migration came fourth place in a list of pressing issues behind inflation and economic growth.
Does that sound familiar to you? It should, because polling data prior to the U.S. election essentially showed the same thing. People were concerned about inflation and they wanted economic development, followed by wanting new policies on illegal immigration.
The Netherlands, Germany, and Portugal are the countries where most people think the fight against illegal migration should be a top priority. In all of them, the far-right parties are on the rise.
Schließt euch an!
The significant thing is the presence of radical right political parties, Bilder in the Netherlands, Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, and Chega in Portugal, political parties which have politicised the migration issue and I think have been driving or contributing to public concern about the issue.
Now, surely you've heard that before. It's the right wing. This is really not an issue, but they are driving people to believe that it's a problem.
At the same time, the EU policy on the topic is sharply criticised. 51% of the respondents consider it negative, while only 16% positive. 71% of EU citizens believe the EU should strengthen border controls, while only 28% are in favour of a policy welcoming immigrants in the name of humane values.
Now, come on, you don't really think that's a coincidence, do you? We have just gone through 4 years of this exact same thing. More Americans wanted to address the issue of illegal immigration. However, the administration, the Biden administration, they did nothing but ignore the people. You had Mayorkas saying, hey, you're secure. Where was Kamala? She didn't bother to go address the border. Joe Biden turning a deaf ear to the voices of the people. One difference here, and maybe it's the same thing there, our media was also promoting the idea that everything's fine. And I say promoting because you really didn't see extensive coverage of what was going down at the border, except for a couple of outlets, namely Fox and Newsmax, which is very interesting.
According to Yediz, the migration debate will drive campaigns in the upcoming EU elections as member states disagree on policy platforms.
And needless to say, the outcome of the EU elections was that the member nations, the votes for the parliament, swung to the right. And that's because, again, inflation, economic development, number 1 and 2, but there was also great concern for illegal immigration. Just months later, it all played out the same here in the U.S. This is an important lesson on so many levels. One, for the politicians, particularly for those on the left. The voices of the people matter. It still matters. And then also for the people, we have got to take a stronger stance on spending. Wait a minute, what does that have to do with illegal immigration? It goes back to my earlier points. As the federal government continues, and it probably won't happen under Trump, but after he's gone, let's say another Democrat comes in, we will see a resurgence of federal money pouring into the states. This is diminishing the influence of the voters because the elected officials, so many of them, would rather follow the dictates of where their money is coming from. And if taxpayers don't see right now that we have to demand more control of spending, we'll want them to send more money because things will be so out of control. Send us more money. But there's a catch to that. So to bottom line it, the questions of why all of this defiance, why so many from so many sectors, from media to elected officials to nonprofits, NGOs, religious organizations, this whole consortium, if you will, of resistance. There's money there, but this is also happening globally. And I don't think it's a coincidence either. We see where the money's coming from, not just from our government, but from deep-pocketed leftists, those who support open borders, and then the United Nations, all of these intergovernmental organizations and agencies pouring money into the U.S., giving this money to these various entities. So I think we know the answers to the whys. I guess the big question is, what are we going to do about it?
A nation without borders is not a nation.